Die verkiesingskommissie moes kritiek verduur na die afgelope verkiesing. Om hieroor te gesels, welkom ek die adjunkvoorsitter van OVK, Janet Love. Janet, welcome.
Thank you.
I want to read you a quote by Dakota Legoete, spokesman for the ANC, who said before the final results were announced, "We are not satisfied with measures taken against double voting. We can't allow an institution like the IEC to go the same way as SARS or the NPA, where confidence was undermined through bad management and incompetence." Coming from the ANC, that must have been a uncomfortable indictment.
Look, I think that any anxiety from whichever quarter is something that the IEC would take very, very seriously. I don't think that coming from a particular quarter would make us take it any more or less seriously. Having said that, Section 24A as an opportunity for South Africans to vote from voting stations other than the station at which they registered.
That's the form that you had to fill in.
It's the provision in the law that enables you to vote at another voting station. And it's something that has been used for the last two national and provincial elections, and it is something that the IEC has expressed anxiety about. And the reason that the IEC expressed anxiety about it was in particular noticing the rollout of the card, the ID card, as opposed to the ID book. And
because the book could be stamped, right?
And yes, absolutely. And of course there were other measures as well, but I mean it was an additional measure. And with the rollout of the card that has been very, very substantial since the last national and provincial by-election, there were obviously additional concerns. But having said that, the IEC was also responding to a very real issue for many, many South Africans, for example, people working in the retail sector and so on, to really not be denied the franchise. And for us, and I think for all South Africans, all political parties, this was the key issue.
Just to ask you practically though, if I made use of the Section 24 form, voting away from home, and I made an experiment and removed the ink, which in some cases could be removed, not in all, and I went somewhere else to vote again, would you have reconciled these double votes at some point and knocked me out of the system, not counting my additional votes?
Look, I think there are various ways in which that is something that gets picked up. And it gets picked up in very specific instances where there are various things that the presiding officers get alerted to. There are instances where party agents who are vigilant give us very specific reports. And there are instances when our system throws out exceptions. We haven't to date received any definitive information of somebody having succeeded in doing something like that. And in fact, the assurance that we've had is that overall we have a result that is something that has been embraced by South Africans, embraced by parties, all of whom had their representatives sworn in today. And that doesn't mean that we are content. But what it means is that we have to look again, together with the people in the legislature, at Section 24A. It has to be made to work in a different way. We need to make it work in a way that it can address the real issues about planning. Because if you don't know how many people are going to vote at a station, you can't plan for it.
Janet, can I ask you about presiding officers? Some concerns were expressed by voters who felt that not all presiding officers might have been as competent as they had hoped. I'm not sure whether this is a representative of the full reality. In the past, teachers and headmasters, headmistresses were often employed as presiding officers in polling stations. Who presided this time? I mean, how did you source your presiding officers? And are you confident that the quality of their skills was sufficient?
Look, there were various concerns, I'm sure, as you know, in relation to people from the teaching profession being relied upon. And over the last couple of elections, certainly the proportion, the ratio of teachers has been reduced. But one of the issues that we were trying to address in these elections was the demographics of people who were part of this expansion staff of 200,000 people, who are effectively, most of them, volunteers, really. And yes, we do have within that contingent, we had 35% of people who had some experience, not necessarily in the IEC, but in particular in managing processes and work. But 65% were very consciously recruited from people who were not employed, people who were young. And we're committed to doing that. As a country, we should all be committed to that. That it might mean that we have to ensure that we have a much more sustained ability to be training people and exposing people to real-life situations, potentially through online training, is something we're committed to.
But your budget at the IEC was cut by some 300 million rand, if I'm not mistaken. How did that affect your ability to, to roll out the best election?
So every election presents us with, I think, a huge amount of success. I think the IEC has really performed incredibly well. But I think that each election presents us with that performance report, but also with different kinds of challenges that we have to address. And as you know, the last election, the local government election, presented us with a really important challenge of making sure our voters' roll has really, passes very high standards and passes constitutional muster. And I think that a huge amount of effort has been expended on that, and I think to good effect. But obviously some things got jettisoned. So part of that is training, certainly. We would have wanted to have online training facilities put in place beforehand, but capacity-wise, finance-wise, we had difficulties.
Janice, very, very briefly, the Statistician General made a finding in the last week about a sample that he studied to look at how widespread irregularities were. In brief, what did he find?
Look, he gave us the assurance that if you looked at the pattern of voting across the sample of over about 1,020 voting stations which were chosen from a random sample, he showed that there is no significant risk of the kind of anxiety that people were expressing that is reflected in the numbers coming out from the voting stations. Does that mean that we think everything is perfect and wonderful and no problems? Of course not. We are very committed to tightening, to improving, and to working, frankly speaking, with every stakeholder in our electoral process, including voters like you, to make it better.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bly ingeskakel. Na die advertensies fasiliteer ek 'n debat tussen twee studente aktiviste oor vryheid van spraak, wit bevoordiging en identiteitspolitiek op kampus.